Welcome back after a couple of days of extra exercise, I'm sure for some, shoveling, and I stayed inside and watched it fall, let my husband come home, and the exercise part. So I am so excited today to be introducing Jessica Allen-Pickett as our guest speaker. The invited faculty lecture is one of the most prestigious honors at Hastings College and dates back to 1985. The two faculty speakers selected each year are selected by students. Jessica brings an interesting background of experiences and knowledge to not only our teacher candidates and the teacher education department, but also the campus community and the Hastings community at large. Jessica's teaching career began with a year in Ecuador teaching English as a foreign language, followed by a year in Washington at the middle school level teaching English. Moving a bit north, she spent a short time as a teacher in Alaska. And this was not a traditional classroom experience, as her students were spread around in villages, so she taught via distance learning. I'm sure it looks nothing like what we think of remote learning in 2020 and 2021. When that position was eliminated, she found that substituting was a great way to continue to hone her skills, gain teaching experiences, and to continue to work with students. One of the things we will frequently hear Jessica mention is the value and experience substituting has for a teacher. Her journey then takes her to Denver, where she was a high school English teacher and then headed into administration for a period of time. Before arriving in Hastings, she spent a short time in Kentucky and Atlanta, where she worked with preschool-age students. I'm sure if asked, she would be happy to share the differences and possibly similarities between teenagers and preschool students. Finally, and fortunately for Hastings College, her family relocated to Hastings. In her move to Hastings, she reflected on her career, and she found she really, really loved working with pre-service teachers. Whether as a student teacher, a cooperating teacher, or supervising student teacher, she thoroughly enjoys seeing the growth as candidates begin their teaching careers. That desire led her to apply to supervise student teachers for us in 2017, and then join the faculty full-time the following year, supervising, teaching, and as our field placement director. You will find her mentoring advisees in the classroom, facilitating learning for our diverse learners, education seminar, or the secondary instructional design and management classes, or working very diligently and with a focus on details in placing our student teachers in their student teaching semester, along with other field experiences throughout their programs. Jessica brings so much to our department and our students. However, if we're honest, Jessica's baking skills are also one of the things we benefit from in our department. She's the first to volunteer to bring goodies, and I'm not sure if any of us are raising our hands because we kind of like her yummies. So it is very exciting that today she is combining both her love of teaching and baking in her time with us. I introduce Jessica Allen-Pickett, Assistant Professor in Teacher Education.
All right, there we go. Well, thank you, Dr. Carr, for that very nice introduction. I hope I can live up to it. And I'd like to thank the students and faculty and staff of Hastings College. It's quite an honor to be asked to speak to you, especially because I'm surrounded daily on this campus with brilliant colleagues. Thank you to those working with the sound, cameras, and technology, and all the others working behind the scenes daily to support the Hastings College community. Thank you to my department for being supportive of me through this process and on a daily basis. Thank you to Greg and Esther for listening to this more than once and eating my practice cookies leading up to today. And thank you to my parents who ensured that I had access to a college education. I would not be here without it. And finally, thank you to all that are here today, as well as those who will be watching later. I truly appreciate your support. So, without further ado, baking, teaching, and service. I often think of my mind as an internet browser with a plethora of tabs open at once, much how my actual internet browser looks. Just ask my daughter, who often scolds me, "Mom, how do you even know what those tabs are?" I toggle between the tabs, so the tab that's front and center is constantly changing and all the tabs are interacting with one another. I know this because Google predicts my searches and offers me ideas based on the other tabs that I have open and some magic algorithm that a brilliant coder created. My mind works much in the same way. I have those various tabs in my mind open at all times, and as thoughts enter my head, they connect with something already open, or a new tab opens in search of its connection. These tabs influence one another and begin to show correlations between them. I mention this because the tab for the faculty lecture for today has been open since last spring. Over the past several months, at least once a week, it seemed a new search was performed in my mind about today's topic. I had several ideas, but they were all influenced by one another and other searches in my head. However, at the heart of each idea was the focus of teaching, which I imagine is not all that surprising. I love teaching and the field of education. On the first day of almost every class that I teach, I say, I love teaching and I love education. And I really, really do. It's like kind of like Sally Fields, you know. Teaching and the field of education are not only my chosen profession, but they are professions that chose me. Trust me, I thought of other careers, I had declared other majors, and I finally just embraced the fact that I'm an educator. So, following in that vein of being a teacher and loving education, today I am going to teach you how to make one of my favorite chocolate chip cookie recipes. Before I do that though, I want you to Google chocolate chip cookie recipe. So take out your phones and your iPads and your watch and all those fancy devices and Google chocolate chip cookie recipe. Anyone want to share some of the ones that pop up? Best, chewy, easy, the best ever, ultimate in stereo, fudgy, ooh, that is a new one. Okay, any others? Original. Easiest. That one's kind of nice. I think the one I'm doing today is pretty easy. It doesn't require a stand mixer, so I put that in the easy column. But the list seems to be never ending. There's pages and pages on Google as far as chocolate chip cookies go. There's classic, soft and chewy, crispy ones that use shortening, ones that use butter, and the list of differences go on and on. Do any of you have a favorite chocolate chip cookie recipe? Anyone? Dr. Carr? Your grandma's. I think I saw a hand over here. Your mom's. I mean, there's some really good feelings associated with chocolate chip cookies. My grandma always had a freezer full. Always. Any other favorite chocolate chip cookies? The ones Grammy makes. White chocolate chips. Any others? All right. So the recipe that's my favorite comes from America's Test Kitchen. And the element that makes it unique is browned butter. I chose to bake today because not only do I get the opportunity to teach, but because I enjoy baking. One reason that I like baking so much is because it's a lot like teaching. In baking, you have a recipe, and in teaching, you have a lesson plan. Each are carefully crafted and have science behind them. However, each, the recipe and the lesson plan, must be tweaked for circumstances such as low and high humidity, gaps in learning, altitude, characteristics of learners, and so forth. In both teaching and baking, you must know your circumstances, available resources, environment, and ingredients or learners. So while I've been chatting with you about baking and teaching and the tabs in my brain, I have been warming up some butter and browning it. It takes about 1 to 3 minutes to brown the butter. And you're just looking for it to kind of take on a slightly darker color than its typical yellow. I also have some butter in its usual state in the bowl here. And I'm going to pour the brown butter over the non-brown butter. Now, it's important when you do this to make sure your butter is nice and hot, because the goal is that then This butter will melt the butter in the bowl. Next, I'm gonna add the sugar. I have some brown sugar and some regular granulated sugar. I personally think that the darker the brown sugar, the better. It gives you more of that molasses flavor. I think it gives a better flavor in general. And then I'm gonna stir them all together. The recipe calls for salt, but I don't use salt because I always use salted butter. So I figure probably shouldn't put any more in. Once the butter and the sugars are all together, I'm gonna add an egg yolk, and vanilla. Then I'm gonna whisk that together. Once they're all happily in the bowl, hanging out together, looking like a nice batter, I am going to let it rest. And what I'll do is, as I go through and talk, I will whisk it for about 30 seconds, let it sit for 3 minutes, whisk for 30 seconds, and let it sit for 3 minutes. And I'll go through that process about 3 times, eventually adding in the flour, baking soda, and finally, everyone's favorite, the chocolate chips. Then I'll scoop them, and I'll put them into the oven, and that'll take about 10 minutes to bake. So while that rests, remember all those tabs in my brain? Well, I have another one to talk about while I whisk and rest the batter. A new tab opened in my mind's browser about 3 months ago. And this tab started influencing my other tabs, particularly the tab for today. Moral purpose is the search that began in the new tab. Educator and author Michael Fullen wrote, "To strive to improve the quality of how we live together is a moral purpose of the highest order." Moral purpose is about how humans evolve over time, especially in relation to how they relate to each other. I read this quotation and it's stuck with me. To strive to improve the quality of how we live together is a moral purpose of highest order. I needed to reread that again to let it sink in a bit better. As an educator, I'm trained to be reflective. So the search quickly turned into a self-reflective question. How am I striving to improve the quality of how we live together? As I began to ponder this question, a tab that's always open in my mind and has been visited with some regularity throughout my adult life, moved to the center stage, educating for lives of service. I went to a small private liberal arts college, Pacific Lutheran University, located in Parkland, Washington, just 30 miles outside my hometown. I chose it for various reasons: scholarships offered, programs of study, a warm and welcoming environment, and so forth. A small college much like the Hastings College community. However, consciously, I did not choose it for its mission and vision. When I attended PLU, part of its mission was educating for lives of service. And even now, education and service are still a part of who PLU is. A few years after I graduated is when this motto entered my consciousness, and I began to ponder whether or not I was upholding my end of the bargain. Pacific Lutheran University had certainly done their part. I was educated, and the proof of that was my diploma, teaching certificate, and working in my chosen field. But was I using my life for service? So here I am with 2 big questions competing to be front and center in my mind. How am I striving for moral purpose to improve the quality of how we live together? And how am I using my life for service? To me, it seems if I could answer either of these questions, I would have the answer to both. Service is defined by the Oxford English Dictionary. I have one in my office if anyone needs to borrow it. The OED is the action of serving, helping, or benefiting, conduct tending to the welfare of advantage of another. There are other definitions, but this seems the best fit for the questions I'm trying to answer. If I'm intentionally doing helpful acts and contributing to the welfare of others, then would I not be improving the quality of how we live together, therefore striving for moral purpose, thus upholding my end of the bargain I struck with my undergraduate institution many years ago? Again, this question, am I using my education and my chosen life path to serve others, is not a new thought. I've pondered this most of my adult life. If you've not realized it yet, the core values of organizations you belong to weave themselves into the fabric of your life and your being. Because this core value is woven into who I am, is the reason my mind keeps returning to this question: am I using my life for service? A few years after graduation, I reflected on the question. I was not in the Peace Corps. I didn't have a job working for a nonprofit whose goal was to make the world a better place. I didn't spend my free time volunteering. So in my mind, I was not using my life for service. And though I spent time reflecting on this, I didn't make any changes in my behavior. Between lesson planning, the school day, grading, and supporting students, I felt I just did not have the time to really focus my energy on service. So I let that idea and browser tab become lost in the myriad of other tabs fighting for attention, and I continued to simply be a teacher. My life took some twists and turns that I was not expecting, as life does, and about 11 years ago, I decided to be a stay-at-home mom. My husband and I moved to Austin, Texas. I was in a new city with a fairly new child and a new identity, as I had lost my teacher identity. Again, the tab labeled Life of Service began connecting itself to other tabs in my brain. Maybe I would volunteer. But between keeping a baby alive and the demands of life, there just didn't seem to be the time. When I did have free time, it was usually during a time that I was unable to leave the house as my child was napping. So I started to spend a little more time with one of my hobbies, cooking and baking. There always seemed to be way too much food for my husband and I, so I would often call neighbors and let them know I had a fresh batch of cookies or made too much for dinner again, and ask them if they would like some of the extra. It was nice to give the extra away, as we did not have the freezer space to store that many leftovers. When I'm in the kitchen, there's a lot of time for me to rifle through the open tabs in my brain. And once again, as I stood in the kitchen of my Austin, Texas home, I wondered, was I living up to the bargain I had made with my undergraduate institution? Was I using my life for service? And again, I reflected, decided I was not doing much to uphold the bargain, but was swept away with all the other duties of life, and the open tab where that question resided became buried in the other tabs of my mind's browser. With our next move, I began to get back into the world of teaching, but also continued to develop my baking skills. I continued to have leftovers. So the wonderful thing about baking and teaching is there's always a staff lounge to drop off the leftovers. And by the end of the day, they're magically gone. So as you're sitting here listening to me ramble on about baking and teaching and my life, I'm sure that a new browser tab is opened in your mind. What exactly do all of these things have to do with one another? Well, it's a great question. The reason that I'm drawn to baking is because of its similarities to teaching. First, there's a recipe. Much like in teaching, you have a lesson plan. The recipe details the ingredients, resources needed, and the process by which to meet your outcomes. Just as in a lesson plan, the materials, resources, and process is detailed out. When deciding what to bake, I enjoy reading recipes, researching the science behind them, and trying new methods and products in the kitchen. In teaching, I love reading about current research, pedagogy, and trying out new methods and strategies in the classroom. However, the most important similarity between baking and teaching is they both come alive and have true and lasting impact when they are shared. Once these cookies are done, they're just cookies. But they become something magical when I share them with others. They are food and sustenance for your body, but when you give away a baked good or a meal, they become joy, comfort, a smile, a shared conversation. They become so much more than a cookie. There are also positive psychological benefits for the creator of the food. As Associate Professor Donna Pincus from Boston University noted, there is an increased well-being through the process of creation and giving for the one creating something. Well, the cookies are delicious, and I can just sit at home and eat them all by myself. The true joy comes in sharing them and working to improve the quality of life for others, even if momentarily, through a gift of food. Teaching is much the same way. Educators are full of information, but without sharing it, the information is just that, information. it doesn't do much for others. And if we simply keep the information or the cookies to ourselves, is this helping to improve how we live with one another? My answer is no. It might improve how I momentarily feel or increase my information base, but it does not meet my criteria of service to others or improve the quality of how we live with one another. Information is to be shared in order for it to become knowledge. These cookies are to be shared to improve someone else's day, not just mine. Today, it often feels that we share all the time. We put tidbits out there in a void as we click like, share a picture, share a meme, tweet and retweet 280 characters, send a DM, or post a dance sequence on TikTok. But when we share in this way, is knowledge truly being constructed, or are we just dumping more information into the void? Are we teaching? Are we serving others? Are we striving to improve the quality of how we live together, or just clicking to fill our time? I would say that when we share information in this manner, it's not truly sharing, it is giving. The Oxford English Dictionary, the OED, defines the verb share as to divide what one has or receives into portions and give shares to others as well as oneself. The verb give, defined as to hand over a thing as a present, to confer gratuitously the ownership of some possession or another person with or without actual delivery of the object. In the definition of give, there's no actual reference to the person who is giving, whereas in share, the person sharing is mentioned, as well as the person being shared with. Also, it's specifically stated that the action is with another person. When I share knowledge, I'm not transferring ownership. I'm still keeping a share of that knowledge for myself. And in fact, I am hoping that it will only grow as I share with others. In fact, if we dig even deeper into this definition in the OED, the definition options of share include to participate with a person in something and to perform, enjoy, or suffer in common with others. And that is what we do in teaching. I'm gonna add the flour here. Take a little minute. So in here I've got some flour as well as baking soda, the leavening agent. And I am going to mix that in with my spatula. And I would recommend that you fold this. If you stir too vigorously, the flour is going to turn into a cloud all over your kitchen. And then you're gonna have an extra mess to clean up. And as my family can tell you, I'm not a huge fan of extra messes. So I'm just gonna fold this in and wait until the flour is all incorporated in. Then once I've determined that it's incorporated enough, I'll add in the chocolate chips and stir those. And then I will scoop them onto the pan and put them in the oven to bake for about 10 minutes. So the OED, back to that. It defines the verb to teach as to impart or convey the knowledge of, to give instructions, just like I did with the flour, or a lesson in a subject, to make known, deliver a message. I would argue that this definition is flawed. I believe that teaching's more of a sharing of instructions or lessons. I did not give away the instructions of this cookie recipe. I shared information because this recipe is still in my head too. As an educator, I'm not transferring my ownership of the information. Instead, I'm sharing it in hopes that I can support the learner in the construction of knowledge, theirs and my own. Because it's true, teachers will not only teach, but they will learn from their students. Each time that we gain information and construct that information into knowledge through practical application, critical thinking, discussions, practice, and one of the many other learning opportunities you have in and outside of the classroom, improvement occurs. So, as an educator, I'm working to help benefit others. If we return to the OED for a final time, I promise. Serve is defined as the action of serving, helping, or benefiting. Conduct, tending to the welfare or advantage of another. Therefore, as a teacher, I am using my life to serve others. And if I'm working to serve, help, benefit, and tending to the welfare or advantage of another, am I not also striving to improve the quality of how we live together? I'll let you think about that for a second while I put these cookies in the oven. Like I said, they're going to bake for about 10 minutes. You may be wondering, is the point of this lecture that you should all be teachers? Well, that would be great. There's a teacher shortage, and I'm always trying to convince people that education is the best profession. But I also know that to be an educator, it has to be in your heart. And maybe it's not in yours, and that's okay. So to get to the point, let's get back to baking. Baking's not an activity that I was trained in or went to college for. It's an activity that I sort of fell into. I did not begin with any intentions of sharing what I baked, but again, if I kept all that I baked, I'd need to do a lot more running than 24 hours in a day allows. So I started sharing what I created in the kitchen. As I mentioned earlier, the act of baking and sharing the baked goods is not an altogether altruistic activity. There are proven psychological benefits for me as well. However, I found through baking and teaching, I'm able to daily live my life in service to others. As Professor Batterson taught us this fall through his invited faculty lecture, it may take a little thinking outside the box to look at your gifts, talents, and chosen path in life, to see it through a creative lens, or in the case for today, the lens of service. But I am sure there is something that we all enjoy doing that we could use in service to one another, thus improving the quality of how we live together and striving for moral purpose. Let's take a minute and think about that. How can you use the life you are creating to strive to improve the quality of how we live together through service to others? I'm going to give you a minute to think on that. Okay. Now turn to someone socially distanced from you. Don't move or anything like that. And take some time to talk through that. In education, we call this a think, pair, share. So now we're currently pairing up. And pair up with somebody and share your thoughts. I'm going to give you about 1:30. All right, and we're going to come back in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Does anybody want to share what they talked with their partner about, how they could use their life in service to others? Anyone want to share? Oh, there was really good conversation. And if this was not COVID, I would have walked the room and listened to you, so I would have shared what you had to say.
So I will share what Matt said.
Excellent.
For those that don't know, Matt is an avid gardener, so he said that he is right now perusing his seed catalog, but thinking about how he could actually plant things this time around to share with others.
So using his gift of gardening to share with others. I like it. And Matt does share his gift of gardening with others. He may not have told people about it, but he does. Dr. Carr? Yeah. Right. I like that too. Other things that people want to share? Oh, I know we have a lot of talented people in this room, and there was a lot of great conversation. That's okay. It's just like a class on a first day. It's hard to share. Oh, sorry, Esther. Oh, okay. She's not going to share. All right. Well, thank you for sharing, and thank you for talking and doing something, a little bit different. These are all great ideas, and I love that everyone is looking at their lives and their gifts and their talents through a different lens. I would like to challenge you, though, once you've found a way to use your everyday life in service to others, to take it one step further. Try and incorporate an act of service into your routine from time to time, whether it's joining a community organization, a campus organization, helping with the Crimson Cupboard, or one of the many other opportunities that are provided on Hastings College's campus, in the wider Hastings community, in our state, and maybe even someday globally. The value of a liberal arts education is that it broadens your perspective and provides you the framework to see the world in a different way. The motto of the small liberal arts college I attended was, "Educating for Lives of Service." Here at Hastings College, our mission is to graduate creative, curious, and caring students through exceptional teaching and deliberate mentoring to thrive as citizens of their local and global communities. The kind of holistic education you are getting here is setting you up to be caring people who strive to serve one another, thus improving the quality of how we live together, giving us a moral purpose, both locally and globally. So, I would leave you with one final browser tab from my mind. There was a song that I sang when I was 5. Don't worry, I will not sing it. It's called Magic Penny. My guess is that most of you have not heard it, but it goes like this. Love is something, if you give it away, give it away, give it away. Love is something, if you give it away, you end up having more. It's just like a magic penny. Hold it tight, and you won't have any. Lend it, spend it, and you'll have so many, they'll roll all over the floor. Well, I would change give to share, and I did not talk about love today. Information, knowledge, and service function in much of the same way. When I share it with others, I don't lose it, but I end up having so much more. These cookies have about 2 minutes left, but thankfully we had a snow day, so they're individually wrapped cookies in the foyer as you leave. You're welcome to them. You're also welcome not to take them. It's completely 100% up to you. But with that, thank you all for coming today.